one of our most exciting parts of our conference, which is our keynote session. So we are lucky to have with us to lead. We're lucky to have with us to lead this session this year. We have from NASCO both Kristen and Chris Risley, this power couple seated just off to my right here. Kristen, the Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer, and Chris, Vice President, Enterprise Risk Management. I know they had their. I don't want to steal their thunder, so I just give a little bit of brief background. So Kristen is certified CISO with 19 years of proven success designing and leading enterprise-wide security programs that have global scale. Protecting global organizations from evolving threats. And then Chris, a visionary leader, we would say, accomplished risk management and insurance operations executive. His career spans over 30 years across diverse industries, including private, public, nonprofits, renowned for building high-performance teams, engineering transformative processes, and delivering bottom-line results. So what they're going to take us through in this session today is entitled Security, Take the Wheel. I'm going to hand over for the next hour to Chris and Kristen. Thank you.
So just want to make sure it's on. Great. Thank you. And thank you so much, FutureCon, for having us and inviting us to speak. I am Chris. This is 10. So we're from Northeast Georgia, and we work for a company that's based in Georgia, but is really all over the United States.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen, and I do have 30 years of experience in the IT space. I've been at NASCO for just 3.5 years. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, as he mentioned, and my background is diverse through mostly medical and healthcare, however, insurance and finance as well.
So we'll just get AI out of the way. I think that picture in the middle is AI created.
Absolutely.
There, now you can say every session had AI in it. So in our spare time, we live on a hobby farm, I'd call it. And every chance I get, we go fishing. I'm a competitive tournament bass fisherman, and I tour all over the Southeast. And Kristen is now learning the hobby as well.
Yes, so started my first tournaments this year in 19-degree weather while it was turning just a little bit warmer and then raining. So it was a miserable experience and I don't recommend it, but still trying it out for the rest of the year because I committed a whole year. We do have 9 kids together, 1 boy and 8 girls, so our house and our life is a little bit crazy. And of course, you can see my best pets there down on the left of the slide, my pet chickens. And why are they pets? Because we can't have livestock in our HOA. So you'll meet Melba, Olive, Lola, and Peaches.
So to begin with, this is going to sound a lot like a case study. We both work for the same company, NASCO. NASCO is a back office system service provider, so we're an IT company. We support Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and our role is multiple roles. We play multiple roles in the back office, so it's customer servicing systems, it's claims processing, it's member management, it's also provider management services. We currently service about 27 million members, and on average, we process about 250 million claims a year, in addition to all of our other service offerings. So as a company, we're probably a pretty good sized company that we hope nobody has ever heard of. And for a while, before Kristen came, I kept thinking, okay, our anonymity is one of our best defenses. That's part of our security structure, but that didn't always work out. So part of what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not going to reveal the punchline too early, but we want to talk about our security journey, and how we chose and adopted a security framework. I think choosing a framework is very important. I'm not going to advocate for one framework over the other, but I will say it's important to understand how frameworks test you. We chose a framework in HITRUST that was a maturity-based. It was very prescriptive with the controls, but it was maturity-based, meaning it was a scale of how well the controls were managing and addressing risks. A lot of the other frameworks, or if you go over to the AICPA, everything is pass-fail. And what do you get when someone says, okay, you failed that control? Well, you were 90% there, but you weren't 100%. That's why we chose a framework that allowed us, as a company, as an organization, to grow our maturity posture, because we felt like, being at that point, a 30-year-old company, our industry and our regulations changed around us, and we weren't changing fast enough to align to those new requirements. So by adopting a framework, what we got was a baseline that allowed us to measure ourselves against the regulatory expectations, the industry expectations in this in a healthcare industry that seemed to be changing, every political cycle. So it felt like for a while, every session of Congress brought forth a new regulation that we had to adjust to. Now, HITRUST gave us a lot of that foundation. In fact, HITRUST used to be called the Health Industry Trust Alliance. It's now just shortened to HITRUST because they're expanding beyond the health industry. But HIPAA was really our guiding principle. We had to make sure that we aligned our work and our security posture to meet those regulatory requirements. And that's a big reason why we chose the framework we did, because HIPAA is not a framework. It's a set of regulations. It's sort of aspirational statements put into a regulation that said, oh, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, but it never really gave you any prescriptive language around what does success look like. So that was one of our guiding principles, and we're a tech company, so ISO was very useful as well, because as a tech company, we needed to manage our stack in a way that still allowed us to work to conform to industry standards, even as the industry was changing around us. Now I will slip a little bit into AI because that's new. Now, we started our HITRUST journey and earned our first certification in 2017. Well, by 2025, that certification looked very different. One of the things that has been brought forward, and I think some of the prior speakers did an amazing job with, was talking about managing AI, and I heard guardrails, and I heard all sorts of detective and preventive measures that need to be put in place to manage AI. And I think HITRUST does a really good job because it basically splits it into two components. It says, are you an AI user or are you an AI provider? And that was important for our company because, well, I think the cartoon earlier said it best. It's coming, it's everywhere, and every executive wants it faster than they even know what it is. So we spend a lot of time talking through AI security and AI risks at our organization as well. But the important thing for us is we realized we weren't really selling AI, so we weren't really an AI provider. But by golly, we were an AI user. We had consumed about 30 unique AI tools into the environment in about a 12-month period. And that's what I guess that's what we know of. So and Kristen and I, of course, are both part of the AI governance panel. And then because of the government work that we occasionally do or that we participate in, NIST seems to be a very important common security framework. FedRAMP sort of feeds into that a little bit too. It's very similarly aligned, and the benefit of HITRUST is you can pull all that in, even if you want to pull a state-specific regulatory activity, you can pull that in too. And it gives it to you in a testable framework. It's very prescriptive, but and the assumption is, yeah, there's going to be some things that don't work well. Then it gives you a roadmap, right? It gives you that roadmap for improvement. And as we move through, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but I think one of the things from a risk perspective, and now you're going to get a security perspective, but on the risk side, it's super important from a people perspective to align authority and responsibility. And that's a lot about what HITRUST does, because it's a risk management framework, it's a security framework, it's a who's on first kind of framework, because it says the first baseman has a specific job he or she needs to do, and they should be responsible for that. You shouldn't go ask the third baseman to do that. And as we talk through some of those concepts, I think that'll become more evident.
So for those of you who don't use HITRUST or have never used it before, Chris, how does the scoring work?
Well, that's a good point. So I mentioned it's a maturity scale. So and it's impossible to be perfect with any control. Nobody gets to 100%. So what your scale is based on is, first of all, do you have a policy that governs how that? I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I'm going in reverse. Do you have a policy that describes what that control is designed to achieve? And then the next step, and that gets a weight. It gets a weight of about 15% on the final score. Then the next step in that process is, do you have a procedure that describes how you perform that control? Because it needs to be specific to your organization, your operation, how you perform that control. That gets about a 25% weight. And then finally, it's the proof. We can use fancy HITRUST terms like implementation evidence, but the reality is, what's the proof that you're performing the control the way your policy says that you're performing it? And that carries a double weight of about 40%. So in the end, if you're perfect on everything for those three core elements, your maximum score is going to be 75%. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, we're only 70%. I said, no, you're 100% of policy, process, and proof. It's just that you didn't take it to the next level. And this is a risk management concept of measured and managed. And that has to do with how well those controls are communicated and discussed at a higher level. But the maturity scale then is, do you get at least 70 out of that 75% credit? And that's when you pass, when each control passes. And the controls are broken down into 19 different domains, and those domains are risk categories, if you will. And you need to have a passing score in each domain. Each domain has between 20 and 75 controls in it. So as you can imagine, it seems very intimidating. It gets to be 600 or 700 controls by the time you've got them all deployed and you're actioning on them. But because they're so prescriptive, they're related. So they'll break down what you think is one process into 4 or 5 different controls so that you can take credit for each step of the process. Oh my goodness, I love this. Oh, so there's a trend going on now, the magic basket. I saw this recently, and I'm like, it happens at my house. So I didn't realize this, and I've thought about this, but so on a farm, chickens, always working, calls, run out on lunch, go do something outside, come back in, change again, kept dropping things into this basket into a closet. And 2 or 3 days later, they'd appear folded on the bed, ready to put away, clean and good to go.
I wonder how that happens. Weird, right? So we joke about it, but what we'll do is we'll demonstrate how this magic basket is similar to how security and IT should function. Chris and I both have the same tool set at home to do laundry, right? We both have the same washing machine, we have the same dryer, we have the same soap. We have softener, but both of us don't use that because we don't configure the tools quite the same way. And even though he gets his clothes cleaned, they're dumped into a basket and he'll wear them that way. Well, of course, that's not my priority. His priority is outside. He's got all of the farm to take care of, and so my priority, clean clothes that aren't wrinkled. So what does that mean? As soon as the dryer stops, I'm out in the laundry room, hanging up the clothes or folding them. And even though we've got the exact same tool set at home, we both have the same skill set, because when I can't do laundry, he does actually pick up his fair share. But ultimately, that describes exactly how security and IT work, particularly when it comes to managing security tools. So let's get into that a little bit further and how it worked at NASCO. When I came in, NASCO was going through a transformation. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan had recently bought them. We moved from a service company to a product company. And over the last 4 years, it has been my intent to change how security was perceived at NASCO. And it really meant redesigning and looking at how the team needed to shift. So I appreciate Tom brought up shift left. I don't think of shift left in security as just moving to a DevSecOps space. Shift left, which I promote regularly at NASCO, is shift all the way left, right? From the point of you are going to conceive a product, you've talked to the customer, what does that customer want, and how do we make it secure right from minute one? How do we participate in design, in architecture, in every Scrum team, part of the Agile process? Sure, we've got DevSecOps too. But it's literally how do you make security part of your daily way of life. So some of the things that needed to change is we needed to change the risk ownership, the accountability of where things were being configured, where they were being administered. We also had to change the inconsistent manual evidence collection and the way that we were trying to prove not only our compliance, but our security. So this is where we started. I walked in the door and it was a very distributed model. Every control was managed someplace else within the organization. It was hard to figure out who had what, who was owning what, who had what tools, but I can tell you what security didn't have was hardly any of their own tools, own processes, and own administration. I'm sure you've all experienced the conflict between IT and security, where IT doesn't want security to actually have administrative rights. We've gone through that too. But ultimately, we were able to prove that we have the same skill sets, and maybe the better skill sets when it came to actually managing and administering your security tools. But more importantly, we had the priority, right? We wanted to manage those security tools and get everything out of them that we could. Security, when I started at NASCO, was very much an advisory function. They did identity and access management for our customers. We had some project management, but for the most part, aside from a little bit of governance and, hey, how do I manage this and how do I make it secure, if somebody ever wanted to actually ask that question and get a real answer, that's all we performed at NASCO when I started. And control implementation was super fragmented. And this is what the org looked like. I had two very distinct groups within the organization: security operations and identity and access management, where our governance, risk, and compliance existed. Aside from those two areas, there was no structure. Those two groups did not get along. They were managed by different managers who did not speak to each other. Most of the team didn't even know the names of the resources on the other team in the security department. And let me tell you, they did not get along with IT. So I was told right up front, fix that problem because you can't get anything done if you don't get along with IT. And so we needed to change that. Did it mean changing a few resources? A couple. But ultimately, most of the team is still there, and we are still moving forward. We've brought in a stronger skill set overall, but we have changed the full dynamic of security. So this is what our tool set looked like, so that you can see the baseline. This is all we did in security when I started. Vulnerability management, that was the security operations team. And we had the Broadcom suite of tools for identity and access management. Aside from some minor use of Netrix for administration, for privileged access management, there wasn't much else. And then, of course, we had a couple of folks who were just starting to understand SOC and high trust and collect evidence.
And that's an interesting point as we're going through, because this was one of her slides. My team literally, from an evaluation, from an audit or an assessment perspective, in many cases couldn't even go to the control owner because the control owner didn't understand what the objective of the control was. We'd have to go to the security team, who would then go to the control owner and work through their magic interpretation. We called it our connect the dots period, where folks that were performing controls were doing it at an operational level, doing a good job, but didn't really understand what risks that control was trying to address. And that level of comprehension just needed to improve.
So this is what that looked like.
So we're going to get in the Wayback Machine and go back to 2023. So I said we had some challenges. Kristen had just started, literally hadn't just hit the ground. My CEO said to me, "You need to make sure she's successful."
He did that.
So at the time, security managed, and I told you the numbers are going to change, so the percentages may not look right. But they would they're exactly right if I could explain some of the background, but tracking the numbers isn't important. The important thing is security ran just about a third, 29% of the controls. It was 180 controls at the time. So you can back into the math. What is that? 545, something like that. But and operations did everything else except for a tiny little bit that was the admin. The 18% was the admin, but the operations owned the relationship with the data center service provider. They technically own those controls. It was literally a part of their contract. And our evaluation, and this is my team as the enterprise risk team with my IT auditors, needed to perform this assessment every 2 years, which is the high trust R2 cadence. So we used at the time the most current version of high trust, because high trust changes a lot. And so the 2023 results against version 9.6.1 were where we completed the R2 certification, showed up with 6 corrective action plans. And a corrective action plan is when you're I mentioned the scoring earlier. If your cumulative score on a particular control from policy, process, and implementation is under 63%, it's really 62.99, but 63%, you got to fix that. That's considered a weakness. If you're a little bit above 63, but you're still under the 70% range, then we're going to give those, we're going to call those gaps. So a cap means something is basically failing. And we had 6 of those. We hadn't seen that in the previous 8 years of doing high trust, from starting in 15, certifying in 17, and then getting there up until 2023. And so the organization, of course, had some other things going on. We're migrating, teams are changing, and leadership is changing. We're adopting different development standards and new project management activities, and some things just fell between the cracks. I think that was my pitch to the board. That all this change, you move fast, you fail fast, and you broke some things, and now let's fix it. And so when I showed them the gaps and the caps, the corrective action plans, and then just the pure gaps in control performance, and then really rolled it up to say, hey, 9% of your controls just aren't working. And they said, well, give us examples. Give us examples of things. And I said, well, trust me, I've got dozens of examples if you want to hear them. But it had to do with the priorities of the different areas. So IT operations is supposed to maintain an asset inventory, an IT asset inventory. And the reason that's important to security, because how does security prove that their vulnerability management scanning tools covered everything? Well, that's easy. You just go to the asset inventory and you confirm that their list and this list match. But then when the IT operations didn't keep it up because they had other priorities, they needed to keep the lights on and they needed to do, they needed to support the product development, the product deployment. What did they do? Well, they didn't really keep that asset inventory up to date. So while the security team is doing everything they're supposed to do and they're scanning everything that they've been told is available to scan, you couldn't prove it because you didn't have an up-to-date asset inventory to prove the completeness and accuracy of the performance of the control. So you lost a few points, and that happened again and again and again. And it was just this disconnect between what is the risk. Security understood the risk that those controls were designed to address, but then you had an operations team that's like, okay, I'm performing a function that I need to perform, and then I've got another job to do. So it wasn't as much friction as much as just a disconnect in the control ownership.
I think another example of that was around change management. In the change management department, security never actually even participated. IT went off and developers went off and they did whatever they wanted and they put in a change. And then, of course, they blamed security when the change didn't work. Well, you better remove CrowdStrike, right? That's the answer to everything, I think. So we needed to obviously make some changes even there and put in some ownership, have some controls go through security, make sure that things were getting reviewed. But it was things like that where we couldn't prove effective controls were in place.
Right. And so did we become a riskier company? Well, that's debatable. But then somebody stepped in.
So this
Somebody took the wheel. I'm sorry. I got to maintain things.
That's right. So this is what my org looks like now. I did create multiple teams within our department, and we went through a full overhaul. We are now known as the EPIC team, the Enterprise Product and Information CyberSecurity team, and we use our acronym all the time so people know we're the EPIC group.
It's EPIC. Oh,
and we have shifted left. We are involved in everything from the product space to the marketing to customer communications, whether we're in an agile team, participating in architecture, design, we are everywhere at NASCO, and we've really tried to make security a daily way of life. So now I do have an identity and access management team. That team is specifically responsible for the identity, more or less, for our customers. So we manage thousands of identities for our customers to our products, and that's what that team does. And you see next to it directory services, and that's why there's a difference. Directory services manages more of our internal NASCO identities. When it comes to AD, privileged access management, MFA, so multi-factor authentication, and SSO. We are in the process currently of migrating from that Broadcom suite of products I talked about earlier. I don't know if anybody's used that, but we're going to Okta instead and using the full suite of products and making that transition. As we looked at the full product stack and what was being used in IT, we made a lot of changes about how do you optimize and create the right tool set to give a full view of the environment. Our security operations team is smaller but mighty. We did bring in a much higher level skill set in that space. They're not just doing vulnerability management. They do everything you would expect. EDR, we do have a SOC that we outsource, but I'll tell you that my team finds most any type of incident before we get notified by the SOC, they're on top of it. So we have a lot of rules set up. We have a lot of alerts set up. We're constantly monitoring that space. And even though we have that backup plan, like most people do with an MSSP and a Tier 1 SOC, we're in that space a lot. We do support the business, and so we have that project team that can reach out anytime somebody needs to implement a new product and they want to have MFA or they want to have SSO or a new token or certificate, whatever it is, they just have questions. That's where the architecture and project management team comes in. They work with our customers as our customers make requests for additional security changes, and so we are regularly meeting across the business. And then finally, we have our...
Yeah, before we go to the new tooling stack, I want to just take this opportunity to talk about how, when we talk about shifting left, governance is now left, shifted way left. And to the point that, and so how many of y'all have policies in your company that are the high-level policies, right? And then how many of you also have standards that conflict with your policies?
We used to.
So at the very foundational level, security, with a little help from risk, rewrite those policies and incorporated those standards into the policies so that they could be consumed more readily by the workforce. Again, shifting left. So before the workforce is doing things, and then we have mandatory policy review and attestation periods. So and then the governance element, the AI governance, the data governance, the security governance, all of those elements are examples of the front end work that now security is more closely engaged in.
Absolutely. And of course, we have a much broader tool set than we did before. So what was a limited tool set and or managed by IT, the configuration, the administration, and the ownership of the security tools now 100% reside within the security space. We have the responsibility, we have the accountability, but we also have the priority. And I think that's key. When they're trying to keep the lights on, it's fantastic. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And I can't discount the fact that I agree, where their time should be spent. But what happens, of course, is that we limit our ability to do security by giving somebody security as their side job. And by taking it out of the IT space and moving it into the security space where I have a team who does nothing but security, who cares what the tools are configured like, and that we're fully optimizing the ability to use those tools, it's made a huge difference. So in the identity and access management space, you still see that we have Broadcom there. We're not 100% transitioned, but we are getting there. We use SharePoint, Jira, and KnowBe4 for our security awareness training, for our project management, and for, well, a lot of things that require some type of intake if somebody needs something from a security perspective. The team is automating that space. So as things come in, like a security exception to a policy, it will automatically flow through all of the approvals that are necessary and such, and we can track those, but we can also report on them and show where our biggest risks are. In the operations space, we moved from Rapid7 to a whole suite of tools. We do manage that full suite of tools. We configure them. They have full domain admin access to those tools, and we don't allow IT to have the same set of permissions to the security tools as they did when they owned them, right? They have visibility. We work with them. We meet with them every week to make sure that we are aligned between the two groups. And now they have an interest, right? They have an interest in pushing the security to the security team. They know they can trust the security team to pull them in when they need them, and vice versa. We pull on the IT team when we need them. And over on the left, of course, we have moved a lot into the cloud space, so we have enhanced our security. Configuration of our AWS environment was there before we actually started developing in it. Kind of amazing, instead of an afterthought. And what I don't have on here is our cloud tools. Those are fairly new. So NASCO has moved or is moving all of our legacy apps from an on-prem world into the AWS world. And so that is also changing where security is headed. But we have fully modified at this point our environment, and security owns all of security. IT owns IT. Kind of amazing, and evidence that it makes a difference.
So I probably should preface this with, I don't know, a drum roll or something, but something that's not in the slides, that is never in writing anywhere, was in the middle of all that assessment back in 2023, we had our own security incident. And that's really how I met Kristen. So I just put that personal item in there. So if you recall from the previous slide, those were our 2023 results. So this is the empirical evidence that showed that the changes made in 2023 and 2024 and in early 2025 paid dividends. So security went from 180 controls to 301 controls, and then took over the relationship from a data center operations security perspective. So now they're at 43%. Of the total controls, and again, because of the new controls and the AI governance controls, the numbers look a little different. We went from 540 to 690 controls tested in this space, but by shifting the ownership of more than 120 controls to the team, to the security area that really understands the risk and understands the output, and it's their only job to perform. We went from one of the worst assessments to one that honestly had to be questioned. It came out too good almost, because the point is you want to use this to develop and get better, and it was amazing. We had upgraded to version 11.2, and in the end we had one corrective action plan, and it wasn't even a real corrective action plan. And we'll argue about this, but HITRUST changed the definition of online e-commerce. And of course, they didn't tell us that there was a new definition until after our certification period had expired. So that's during what's called the QA process, and that's part of the HITRUST scoring. And regardless of what security framework you should adopt, there's always going to be a review process where we want to sort of rationalize what we're seeing and what we're not seeing. And they said, well, HITRUST said to us, well, we're going to define e-commerce as any computer system to computer system transaction that touched the internet. I'm like, dude, I'm not selling backpacks here or fishing gear. We're not transacting. This information comes in, we facilitate the calculations, and we send it back to the customer. properly managed and ready for EOBs. That's not how the product works. And they said, well, we've decided that's the new definition. And so as a result, you had to do certain kind of transaction scanning activities, which we did. But because the activity was beyond the end of the certification period, we weren't allowed to submit that evidence. So we got a fake corrective action plan, and that's the only reason why the report wasn't perfect, and it was frustrating. And that's really hard to explain to a board too. Yeah, we put in place some controls, we made some adjustments. It resulted in a very dramatic improvement in control performance. And we could have mapped, and I wasn't going to put a big spider diagram up here that would show how the control scores changed in each domain based on the security team taking control and ownership of those outputs, and the improvement in the documentation. But the reality is, it was shocking. And so we first presented this evidence this information to our plan customers in January in Florida, and they were like, oh, that can't happen. I said, well, it did. It did, and it happened because we leveraged the urgency of a not great report and the urgency of a security event, and made the changes. And it wasn't like it was a dramatic tripling of the budget. It was just putting the right people in the right places to support the control performance improvement. And of course, I'm happy because as the risk manager, I'm like, okay, now I can more clearly see how those controls are addressing the risk. And more importantly, I can clearly see how the security team recognizes how those risks are being addressed. And so we don't have to have that what is the risk conversation anymore, because we already know it. We already know what the outcome is intended to be, and what those tools are designed to address, and what good looks like. It goes back to having a baseline. So in the end, we had a couple of gaps. We still are trying to figure out that asset inventory thing I mentioned before. But the improvement, and think about that. You got 690 unique controls, and you got 8 things that you have to talk about. That's just unbelievable. And I give all that credit to the changes and the improvements that the security team made.
So the security team, I'll give credit to. We do have a GRC team, and they own making sure that we are meeting the requirements for all of these controls. My security team owns making sure we're actually secure, right? And you have to do both. You have to have compliance, which we're proving we've got here, but you also have to have security. And so I have specialists on my team now who not only understand the controls, but understand the evidence they should be receiving, and understand if the evidence actually means you're secure. And too often, you all know, you can produce evidence that make you compliant, but it doesn't mean you're secure. And we really want to do both. So the whole purpose behind the transition was making sure that we could do both, and that we could move from a corporation that was compliant with, well, a lot of gaps, to a corporation that was mostly compliant and also secure, so that now when we produce evidence, we can clearly demonstrate that our controls are in place, they're effective, and that they are meeting the security requirements beyond just compliance.
When I put my compliance hat on, which is partly what I do, we start looking forward, and it gives us the confidence to continue to expand the scope of our assessments, right? Because those of you that understand how adopting a baseline, or a security framework, and how you include parts but don't include parts, and we all have these, the headlines about, oh, they were a XYZ secure company, but they still got breached. Well, I mean, it's for everybody. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But as we continue to expand our scope of our assessments to new products, new environments, this really has been a foundational shift that allows us and allows the company to grow in the right way. And security was the facilitator of that.
So as you can see, we were able to realign resources. There was some angst along the way. Nobody likes to lose control of systems that they've always managed. And so you're going to have a little bit of a battle. But if you can produce the right level of understanding, and you can give the IT team enough assurance that your security team has the right skill set to keep the lights on also, even if it's not their top priority, while the IT team keeps the lights on, they can give away their side job doing security. It really does create a better balance, and the right people are doing the right work with the right skill sets and the right interest and priority.
And I think it just significantly improved communication, because when you're talking about security controls and the security tooling, it's a very specific language. And at least from a risk perspective, we don't have to have multiple meetings. We can talk about the issue, and security will come back, and it just makes the communication so much easier as well.
So the business is optimized. We are working with the business. We do what the business needs. We sometimes have to think outside the box, as you know, because the business always wants to do something that's, well, not secure. We are pivoting 100% every day, all the time, trying to work with the business. But ultimately, our goal is to reduce risk, but still let the business. And it's a challenge, but we find ways.
And it's almost like we have to teach ourselves how to speak this language, because now then, as we have firmed up our own internal foundation and we're building this house, it allows us to now have more direct conversations with our partners and our vendors as we expand the expectations beyond our own walls to work with the expectations of our vendors and our downstream entities, our customers, fourth parties, if you will. So that there's a better understanding, a better alignment on the front end of those relationships. I can tell you that we've had some amazingly long contractual negotiations, but that's because we're building this in, and it's shifted so far left that the relationship doesn't even exist yet. And we're still talking about security and audit controls to define that relationship.
So our basket of laundry is clean at home. And probably I'll continue to do the laundry while he continues to work outside.
Okay, so we've got they're going to bring some microphones around because nobody online will be able to hear us if we don't. So if you guys could, we've got a question up front here. And I don't know if there are any online questions. Oh.
He's getting his steps in.
Can you take my watch? If you're gonna, anybody getting Fitbits, give it to him, right?
I love the realignment, but my question is, where did the disaster recovery fit in relationship to the new alignment? Because that deals with the security of everything as well as the inventory of the systems to be able to bring them back up and have the resilience, and that covers the risk also.
I got part of it. So the asset inventory issue, is that what we're
So where did disaster recovery fit in as part of the issues that we experienced, and how does it fit in now from where fit in previously.
Okay. So good question. So disaster recovery, incident response, and business continuity are all treated slightly differently in our organization. Thankfully, if we went to about the one event that we had, that wasn't impacted because it was on an ancillary system that was outside the scope, and it didn't touch any of our products or any of our core systems. It was just one of those things, we've all heard of move it. It was just move it. But from an asset inventory perspective, I think that we've been able to, first of all, controls have a list of all the attributes that are required to be in there. What data is on the asset, who owns the asset, all of those elements of the inventory, of the asset inventory management system. And by, again, freeing that up so that operations just needs to do it and fill all that in, and not having them constantly figure out why or what or if, and just do it. The security team can then leverage that and get to that completeness and accuracy. And it's one of those things where everybody's doing their job right. It's just they're not connecting the dots. And so there's no real fault. We just weren't really covering the risk. And so by bringing visibility to those issues and then having having built all those new partnerships, it has been much more successful.
More specifically on the business continuity, disaster recovery side, we still have the security team handle security incidents at the point that we identify business continuity and or disaster recovery are needed beyond the scope of what security does. We bring together a team, and it still includes risk, privacy as well, IT, and security. So we work as a team in order to continue to move those things forward. When we go and do our disaster recovery exercises, it includes that whole group of people, and we all participate. Same thing with our business continuity tabletop exercises. We have everybody participate. We make sure that the tabletop exercises have scenarios that will require everybody participate, and that we can work together as a team and just grow that relationship.
With that said, down the same line of thinking, how do you have TPRM integrated into the process, or coupled or segmented? How does that work for you guys?
So TPRM, third-party risk management, I assume that's what the acronym is. So third-party risk management falls in my area, but the assessment of the results is a shared activity between risk and security, so that we can define what is acceptable risk, and then, if necessary, develop mitigating strategies that will align to security expectations. So it's a functional activity for risk, but it's a governance activity for security, unless there's an issue, and then we both have a hand in determining next steps, or whether or not it's even appropriate to use a particular vendor. And we have disqualified some vendors along the way for just not quite meeting our expectations.
But this was an area also that we expanded when I took on the team. As we bring any new software, AI, any tool, my security architect has to do a full security review of that product, of that software, of the risks. And we write up a report, and then that is evaluated with the risk management team. And if AI and AI governance team, so that we can make a determination about whether it's the right product or the right direction for the company. Again, pulling together all of the right resources to make those decisions instead of it being managed in a silo.
I believe there's a virtual question on your screen
Okay,
from one of our listeners.
virtual question, and we've got one more over here too. what is your organization doing on post-quantum cryptography and HNDL and Q-Day? A typical PQC migration
Is this just a test to see if you
takes
could read
3
that?
years to 7 years. This sounds like a statedly pleasure dome degree.
The-
One of those Hannibal statements.
It's the same question as earlier. And the answer is the same. Nothing. That's not our focus currently. Obviously, I'm aware, but that is not going to be a topic for today's discussion.
Yeah, it's amazing what is emerging, but we can't talk about everything 2, 3, 5 years out. Okay.
Hi. I really liked your new org chart. So we are currently in our organization dealing with a problem where the CISO has come from a line of thinking where they are used to operating very independently of IT. Now they're part of IT. And no one centrally owns logical access or identity and access management as a pillar. And despite the CIO basically trying to get it over to the CISO, it's just not happening. As auditors, as internal auditors, do you have any tips of how we can help make that happen, or do we just have to let it play out? And maybe a secondary question is, how common is that where CISO owns identity and access management?
I can't speak to necessarily how common it is. I am the head of security at my 4th or 5th company now, and I can tell you it's been a transition at every one of those companies where you can look at your audit records almost always and see where identity and access management fails. And by keeping it segmented, you create those failures. And even if you listened to the presentation earlier, I think it's a fabulous thing to take back to your organization. When we first started security, every application had a different ID and a different password. And sometimes, sure, you had people who used the same password, but oftentimes they did have different passwords, and it was harder to get one password and get into every system. We fixed that, right? We decided, SSO was going to be the next best path, and we said that was going to be more secure. I don't know about more secure. All it meant is people weren't writing a number of passwords down and tracking those, but now they have one ID and one password that gets into everything in your systems. So then what did we do? We fixed that with MFA. Well, we know that MFA fails. We know that the ID password fails, and we know that identities are the way everybody is breaking into systems right now, right? It's our biggest vulnerability within our environment, and the biggest one way somebody gets into our environment. They get one fish, one person who gives up their username and password, and it gets them into everything they have access to. And MFA fatigue is a real thing. We've experienced it in our environment. So really what I would do is highlight the risk. Make sure that everyone understands what the risk is, and that is going to be the way you are breached if you're breached. And one step at a time. You take on AD, then you take on a product access. Then as new software is brought into the company, you have that group start to own the access for that specific product. So it's really one at a time. I don't think that a CISO can ever get away with not working with IT. They need to be your best friend, and that relationship needs to exist. There's no way for you to be successful as a CISO if you haven't created that relationship. And so I kind of feel for your CISO.
And from an IT audit perspective, what she just said was basically, we have to take turns playing good cop and bad cop. Because sometimes I can make the argument from a control failure perspective and from a risk perspective, She'll make the argument from a security perspective. We just have to decide who gets to play good cop and who gets to play bad cop that day.
I'm bad cop usually. It's the red hair.
Okay, I think we are out of time. Yep, we're a minute over. So thank you, everyone. And thanks again
Thank you.
for allowing us to participate.